Welcome to the Forged by Trust podcast. My name is Dreeke, former United States Marine, spy recruiter, and trust expert. This episode of Forged by Trust is brought to you by my first book, ironically called It's Not All About Me, the top 10 techniques for a quick rapport with anyone. Success starts with healthy relationships, and all relationships start with rapport. In It's Not All About Me, I walk you through the 10 techniques set against my backdrop of training counterintelligence agents and spy recruiters for the FBI. Check out this quick read with my 5 practical exercises in the show notes and on Amazon.com. Available in paperback, digital, and audio formats. Coming up next on the Forged by Trust podcast.
So when I was young, the Marine Corps barracks were bombed in Beirut, Lebanon. I just started wondering, why would somebody do that? And as I got older, I just got really fascinated with terrorism. And when I learned what espionage was, I wanted to get into intelligence. It led me down the path of trying to figure out why someone would harm other people for their beliefs. So I was trained by DIA and CIA. I got the best of both worlds. And I got to support the warfighter. When I was a case officer, one thing that I took incredibly seriously was the respect that I had to have for the people I was working with. You just really learn to understand that no matter who you are, everybody has some good in them. When you get to know people on a human level, you'd be surprised what you'd find.
Welcome to the show. I'm Dreeke, and on the Forged by Trust podcast, we decode the interpersonal communication skills of the world's most acclaimed forgers of trust. We unlock the skills and techniques from spies, spy recruiters, master interrogators, globally recognized behavioral experts, C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, acclaimed authors, and thought leaders. Each episode provides specific actions that you can immediately apply to any aspect of your personal or professional life. Today's episode, The Insider Threat, is my good friend and another world-renowned spy recruiter and insider threat expert, Shawnee Delaney. Shawnee Delaney is an insider threat expert, cybersecurity consultant, and CEO of Valiance Group, an insider threat consultancy and training organization. She's a decorated intelligence officer and licensed private investigator and has conducted thousands of public and private sector investigations. Ms. Delaney spent the better part of a decade working with the Defense Intelligence Agency as a clandestine services officer and conducting human intelligence operations around the world. After the DIA, she worked alongside the Department of Homeland Security, where she coordinated and managed intelligence community relationships with the private sector. During today's episode, we talk about transitioning from living on a ranch to a spy, inspiration to serve, curiosity as her spark, get to know people at the human level, tackling the insider threat in a holistic way, the greatest human vulnerabilities, and what people can start doing today. Hey, Shawnee.
Good morning. How are you?
I am fantastic. I love the little graphic that comes up right before you come on. It just has an S like Superwoman.
Well, that's me.
It absolutely is. One of the greatest pleasures in life is being able to have a great conversation with amazing, interesting people. The challenge is that amazing, interesting people are busy. So thank you so much for having time. This show really is about highlighting you.
Okay.
And as someone coined the other day, what the show really is, it's having a great intellectual conversation with a heartwarming story.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody has a heartwarming story, or 5 or 10.
That's a great segue. What was the path that led you to being a spy recruiter?
Probably not your typical story. I grew up on a ranch. I was a little farm girl. We didn't have neighbors. There was no big neighborhood. I grew up in the mountains in California, and my whole life was 4-H and livestock and doing, food preservation and leather working and, sewing and arts and crafts. Like, I was a total nerd. I will fully admit that.
Oh, I love that stuff though. I think it's fantastic.
I collected comic books, which I still have. My kids don't appreciate them yet, but they will one day. And I was probably the black sheep of the family in that I kind of had 2 worlds. I grew up with 2 families. I had a family that since I was 4 months old, I lived with half the time, if not 60% of the time, who had a daycare, and they kind of adopted me as their own. They're still my family. And then my parents, who worked really far from home. And so that's why they had to drop me off at this daycare. And the daycare family had the livestock, and it was dirty, and animals were in the house, and there was baby sheep and horses and donkeys and geese that chased me. And
So, okay, I gotta stop again right now. These little nuggets are so fascinating. So what did your parents do that they work so far from home?
so when I was little, my mom was actually a sheriff's deputy,
Huh.
and my father was a plumber, a foreman forever. So he worked on all kinds of cool stuff, building, rooms for missiles and clean rooms and all kinds of stuff like that. So his job sites moved all the time, but it was
Sure.
always because we were up in the mountains, Santa Cruz Mountains, nothing's close. And then my mom, when she left being a sheriff's deputy, she ended up working at Stanford University for, I don't know, 30 plus years
Wow.
as a facilities manager. And Stanford University was very, very far. At the time growing up, there was no highway. There was Highway 85 is what they had built. I remember, I think I was in high school and there was like a big party because everyone in the Bay Area was so excited we could like take shortcuts. So I would get dropped off at dark, like 5 a.m. And this family would leave the front door open, and my mom would let me in, and I'd wander in, and they had either
How
made
old
up
were
the
you?
couch. I mean, from 4 months old.
Oh,
It was
wow.
my
And so why did
forever.
they choose this family? Was it the only family to choose, or how'd that
So
work?
there were a few families up in the mountains that had daycares, and I don't know why they chose this family, but it was fate, maybe. That I
Was there other
call.
kids there too?
Yep, there were other kids. There were a ton of kids,
Wow.
but I think I adopted them and they adopted me. So I still to this day, like, I call the patriarch of the family is my papa, and my kids called grandpapa and grandmama. And they had two daughters who I consider my sisters, Julie and Diane. So I
Wow.
was raised in two worlds. What I'm trying
Wow.
to say is I had this
Yeah.
filthy livestock hanging out in sheep pens, and then I would go home and we had antiques. We couldn't wear our shoes in the house. Curtains were for decoration only. Just two very, very polar opposite worlds.
Wow. That is pretty remarkable. So what happened from there?
So when I was young, the Marine Corps barracks were bombed in Beirut, Lebanon.
I
And
remember.
my father always watched Dan Rather. I've told this story before, but it still makes me laugh. Like I remember when my father put his newspaper down and hyper focused on what Dan Rather was saying. And I joke, I mean, I had a crush on Dan Rather. I still do, that voice. And he was so smart, nothing better than a smart man with a deep voice. And so as this little girl, I just started wondering, why would somebody do that? And it just led to more questions. And as I got older, I just got really fascinated with terrorism. And when I learned what espionage was, and that, it wasn't bad unless it's going against you, I
Right.
wanted to get into intelligence. And so no one in my family, I mean, they're the polar opposite. So I just pursued everything I could to get into intelligence.
So this is interesting. What the interesting part is, I'm hearing curiosity at a
Yes,
young age, and
very.
how curious. What kind of things sparked that, do you think?
It's entirely accurate, and I still have that problem today.
How's
For me,
okay, how's curiosity a problem?
because I can't turn my brain off at night, I'm hyper curious. I was just so interested in, and I didn't know it at the time that it was psychology, or I didn't know religion. I didn't understand any of that stuff, but it led me down the path of trying to figure out why someone would harm other people for their beliefs. It led me down the path, like the books behind me. I've got like a bunch of cult of personality and
Right.
psychology and terrorism, because it was so interesting to me. And as I got older in college and graduate school, I was so interested in how people like Mao could convince their own families to go against them and turn them in, or Pol
Right.
Pot, or it just was interesting. It was, why do people do the things they do for their beliefs or their passions or their fears, right?
So what was it like on the ranch with the other kids that you're doing daycare with?
I kind of was in my own world. I lived amongst the animals. I was a very solo, shy child. I was happier sitting in a sheep pen, hanging out with a sheep or 10 than hanging out with other kids.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And so the curiosity, was it sparked then? What were you first curious about that you started asking questions about? And most importantly, did you ever feel shut down, or were people answering your questions?
People didn't know how to answer my questions. I think I didn't ever really feel shut down, just more people were like, why do you care?
Right.
Yeah, so I just kind of sought out answers myself in different ways. And then as I grew up, like in high school, I had a high school teacher, Denny Dates, who's phenomenal, who was so hard on me. but because he saw that I was curious, and we're still
What
in touch
subject?
today. So he taught social studies, but he had created this really cool game where people like were a country and they tried to like negotiate for goods and services, and it really made me start thinking about the world. I drove him crazy, but just such a good teacher. You know, he
Right.
pushed me outside my comfort zone. And I actually remember in high school, I was talking to him and I was trying to he was so serious. I was trying to make him laugh. That's something I tried to do when someone's very serious. I remember making a comment about being a spy. I was going to be a spy. And he looked at me and he was like, "You would be a terrible spy." And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Because you talk too much."
That's interesting
uh,
that you grew up in the pen with the sheep who didn't interact with the other kids, yet he says you
yeah.
talk too much. What happened?
Yeah. So I think I retaliated a little bit. When I got to high school, I was very lonely, and one of my best friends had moved away, so I did not have friends. And so I tried making friends. I was pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. And I remember he had tables set up in like a U shape.
Mhm.
And I was trying to talk to people next to me throughout class. And he ended up moving people away from me. And so to spite him a little bit, I invented an imaginary kid named Stuart. And so I got the whole rest of the class to start talking to Stuart. And one day finally he goes, "All right, Shawnee, I will let people sit next to you again if you just make Stuart go away."
Wow, that is really
Yeah,
inventive.
yeah, yeah.
And what
That's
made you
how I got my
say
way.
that is pretty amazing? What do you think was the reason why you said you want to grow up and be a spy even back in high school?
I don't know. I think it was really my curiosity about, like I said earlier, why people do what they do, the motivations of that. I wanted to serve my country. I grew up. My mom was a sheriff's deputy. Her brother, my uncle, was a cop. My grandmother was a woman Air Force service pilot, a WASP in World War
Oh,
II.
wow.
I grew up thinking she single-handedly won the war. So I had a lot of
Sure.
strong, role models that I wanted to follow
Service.
and that I had admired. I couldn't do the military. I tried to sign up for the military and just chickened out before the ASVAB test because I was afraid they were going to stick me in something I didn't like. And
Yeah, so a feeling of a loss of sense of control, maybe.
yeah, type A, type
Yeah,
A.
that's
Yeah.
pretty interesting. So you see the Dan Rather talking about the Beirut bombings. What was next?
Yeah, well, I grew up. I read what I could, and then when I went to college, I studied international security, political science, really focused my studies on the Middle East and Asia. And then when I ended up going to graduate school, I've been twice now. The first time I got a master's in counterterrorism and counterproliferation. I was actually the first student at that school to put those two together, and it took me
Oh,
2 years to negotiate with the dean that they belonged together. And I'm proud to say after I left, they actually created a program for that. But I had figured out that, and I studied Al Qaeda even before September 11th, but I had figured out that kind of the way things were going, terrorist groups, nation states that were supporting them were moving towards weapons of mass destruction. Pick your poison. And so I really wanted to study them together, which is why I put them together. And then when I got my second master's, it was in cybersecurity because I felt like, again, with you're looking at Al Qaeda and ISIS and ISIL, you're seeing that they're morphing their tradecraft and their techniques into leveraging cyber means and social media. And so I wanted to understand how I could put all of that together.
wow. Where'd you go to school for all that?
Both schools have changed their names. The first one was Monterey Institute of International Studies, which I think goes by Middlebury now.
Uh-huh.
And then the second was University of Maryland, University College, which is
Right.
a mouthful. And I don't know what they're called now.
Yeah. So, all right. So we get our degrees in these things. How did you get involved with doing what you did, the DIA?
Yeah. So when I was in college, I'll back up to college, I'd applied with the CIA and, attended the recruitment sessions and tried to
Right.
recruit the recruiter and, really convince them they needed me. I went through the whole process and actually got a job offer with CIA. They told me I needed to buy a car. It was very low level. It was like entry level.
Sure.
You're gonna need to buy a car because we get snow here and blah blah blah. So I bought a car. I was ready to move, and then about 2 weeks before I was supposed to start, they called and said, "I'm sorry, we've decremented the billet." So they got rid of the role. That was probably one of the hardest things I've ever gone through emotionally. I was devastated because it's all I wanted, and I was just told no.
Right.
So I then decided I would find a way to get to yes. And I applied with FBI, NSA, and DIA. I was determined I was going to get my foot in the door somewhere and end up doing what I wanted to do. So sometimes.
So here's the funny question. So you don't want to go in the military because you said you wanted a little more control, yet you're trying to join organizations where you're still not going to have any control either.
True, but I feel like in Intel, you have a little bit more control. At least in
That's
Intel, I could say, like, I studied Arabic. I was fluent in Spanish at the time, not anymore. So I could leverage my skills
right.
to go sit at the desk I wanted to sit at,
Okay.
more so than the military.
Right.
So anyway, I got job offers from all three organizations
That's
and
impressive.
then decided on DIA because DIA went through the same training at the farm that CIA goes through. So I was trained by DIA and CIA. I got the best of both worlds and I got to support the warfighter. So I just pursued.
What was the most challenging thing about, first we'll start with training, any aha humbling moments along that path?
That you can't please everybody. I'm a people pleaser, oddly. And it was a really tough pill to swallow, understanding that I could be my normal, nice self, and some people weren't going to like that.
When was the first time you faced that?
When I first joined DIA, there were two women who did not know me, had never spoken to me, and decided they didn't like me, and really made my life unbearable. In fact, the end of my career at DIA, there was another woman who did the same thing. And she is one of the reasons why I think I was like, you know what, I'm done. I'm gonna go do something else.
What did they see when they saw you, you think, that they didn't like?
You'd have to ask them. I don't know. There are some women, and people might not like to hear this, but there are some women who are constantly threatened by other women, no matter who they are. And I think these women were just highly insecure.
Right.
And it wasn't just me. There were other women that they attacked as well. So you saw patterns of behavior, but it was really, really hard for me to not take it personally because it wasn't about me. It was about them. But at the time, it was just so hurtful because I am very team oriented. You know, I will help anybody. I would just want to learn. I just want to do a good job. And for people to judge me or try to spread rumors about me was really painful.
So doing the whole recruitment thing, gaining intelligence, gaining the trust of others throughout the world requires a really high level of self-awareness and humility. Yeah. How did that come about? Where do you have your sense of humility from and sense of self-awareness?
I think it's there. I think there are some skills you can't learn that you're just born with, and you are just, those are personality traits that I have. One thing, when I was a case officer, one thing that I took incredibly seriously was the respect that I had to have for the people I was working with,
right?
Both in my agency, other agencies, but the sources, the assets. I saw other case officers not treat people with the same level of respect and humanity that I think they deserved, and that really bothered me. We are all flawed. We all have made incredible mistakes. I have made plenty. And I think working with people from all walks of life, from, I don't know, terrorists to cab drivers to politicians and influential people and everyone in between, you just really learn to understand that no matter who you are, everybody has some good in them. Everybody has a good story. Everybody's got humanity and humility and fears and insecurities. And it's connecting with people on those levels and really truly getting to know them that I think made me really good at my job. I mean, I still to this day think about and worry about people that I worked with years and years and years ago. I spent time with their families. I cooked in the kitchens with the wives and the aunts and the grandmothers, and then went and ate dinner that we cooked with the men. So I could straddle both worlds. And I just have really incredible memories, and I really still care very deeply about those people.
It sounds like you were very non-judgmentally curious about these human beings. How do you overcome your own sense of your values, your morals, your ethics, and build a connection with people that might not share the same?
That's challenging. It would be challenging for anybody, but it's just something that I kind of worked through with myself. There were many bad guys, as you would call them. There are many terrorists, some very, very high level that I worked with.
I want to stop right there. You said bad guys that I'd call them. You didn't see them as bad guys, though, did you?
I think that what they did in the past was horrific, but people change. And there was one I've talked about publicly before, the mullah. There was one that was a senior leader, knew Osama bin Laden, was in on the planning for September 11th. And going into that, I mean, supported the Taliban and everything that entailed, is against everything I believe. And going into those meetings, it was really hard to, in the back of my head, not be like, gosh, you're such a dick, But I would
so well, so succinctly, yes. Some people just are.
Some people really are. Spending 8 to 9 hours a meeting with this man, getting to know his fears and his passions and why he left bin Laden and his family history. I mean, I really got to know this man. And in the end, we really liked each other. We actually had a conversation where I said, I have to ask you, I am a white Western woman. Like, I
with red hair.
am not, right. Like, in everything you've ever done with these groups, I am not who you support or like or take care of or honor or respect. Why are you working with me? Why are you talking to me? And he kind of smiled, and he always got this little crooked smirk, like, good question. And he said, why not? And he went into this long diatribe. Like, we had a really good conversation about how he thought about life and people and all that had changed. And we when we departed, he talked a lot, but I really liked the guy. And I don't know. When you get to know people on a human level, you'd be surprised what you'd find.
Which is what makes the greatest. I don't even like the word recruiter, because recruiter says it gives that connotation of
right, that
control.
It's fake.
Yeah, and it's not. You have this natural ability, but I want to try to break that natural ability down as much as we can to see the beauty in others beyond a vector of horrendousness that a lot of times is caused by things out of their control, the inputs they have, the trauma they've been through,
how they were raised.
And that's not their choice. It's just where they are in life, their economics, their status, their all these factors that they're totally out of their control.
Right.
So what did they see when they saw you?
I don't know what they saw in the beginning, but I can tell you what they saw in the end. They saw a champion, they saw a friend, they saw someone who had their back and their family's back whenever they needed it.
We're just talking about making these great human connections, and to do so at this higher energy level, a lot of times the greatest recruiters like yourself will be in situations where you might physically not even come anywhere close to representing the person in their life, that they all of a sudden say, you remind me of someone, is because how you psychologically make them feel comfortable. And so you had an example that you wanted to share.
Yeah, which is, it's funny because the way you say it, I've never thought about that before. Yeah, so there was a foreign general, a military general that I was working with, and he kept telling me that I reminded him of his ex-girlfriend. And up until we just talked, I kept thinking, there's no way that I remind you of your ex-girlfriend. But he even brought an old black and white photo of her one day to show me. And yeah, I think it's interesting. But to your point, like, it is energy. We are all made of energy, right? Everything in this earth, my desk, everything here is made of energy. And so I think when it comes to recruiting and development, it's tapping into each other's energy better. And it's not just that listening, but it's listening and it's feeling those vibrations.
Right.
I'm from California, so I can say this stuff. I think it's in the water.
Hey, I'm from New York and I still say it too. It comes down to watching and reading the energy vibration of someone else and doing your best to match it and make them feel comfortable in those moments, psychologically and energy.
Absolutely.
It's a skill, and that's a skill that's a challenging one. How do you?
And there are a lot of situations I've been in where I've needed to do that too. People who were upset, or people who were stressed, or people who were fearful about me coming in and they don't know me. I've held hands with men and cried about their things going on in their life, but it's because I came down and assessed where they were at what level. And I think I'm an empath by nature. So I think a lot of that plays into it as well. Like I will feel your pain and your excitement and your sadness. So much so I'll go home exhausted, but it's that energy that is just so critical, that empathy in developing these relationships.
Everyone just wants to be understood. That's
Yeah,
it.
and
Not
loved.
not necessarily agreed with, because it's not like you're agreeing with their morals, ethics, or choices in life. It's
Right.
that you're listening and understanding them and making that connection that few people
Right.
will do their utmost for. So good on you for that. And that's why you're so successful. And that's why someone that is looking at you, they're not seeing what you look like physically, they're feeling what you're giving them psychologically and emotionally. And that's where the
True.
real power and influence comes from. Is that the greatest challenge you think of people trying to build connections?
Judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do people
Yeah.
overcome that?
I don't know that people can. I don't know that some people can. I think, the women I was talking about earlier, there's no way on God's green earth these three women could ever overcome their judgment. And I think that's because of their own insecurities, like I said earlier. When people become more self-aware and recognize, like, this is why I have a problem with this person, or this is why I'm judging, maybe then they can step back and understand. Like with Mr. Terrorist, I had to step back and be like, okay, yes, he's known about and done terrible things. He hasn't murdered anybody himself. He was aware of the planning. I need to step back and I need to see him a blank slate as an individual. I
Today.
can't judge his past. I can't determine what his future is going to be, although I'd like him to help us. Yeah, today. Because again, I've made mistakes. Who says that I'm any better than him? Right?
So is this something that you were trained to do? I mean, I try to understand sometimes so people can understand. Was this from training you got this, or they just gave you the opportunity to be you? What do you think it's more of?
I think in training, they definitely talk about trying to be impartial and not biased. For people, that's hard. That I don't think, again, that's something you can train and be like, all right, you flip the switch and you're good. You're never going to judge anybody again. I actually would joke, I'm not judging you, I'm assessing you, which is a little case officer humor, because we are constantly assessing. You're assessing someone's motivations, their vulnerabilities, their suitability. I don't know. I think a lot of it came from just my own self-awareness.
And when you're in a workplace, and now I will keep progressing, which brought you to eventually when you left and got into insider threat. And I love how you tackle the insider threat on a human level, not on
Yeah.
hey, here's a checklist of a witch hunt to go on, find you level. This is how we create these relationships so we can inspire people to not want to be an insider threat.
Exactly.
And so what kind of muscle memory can someone start doing to start looking at people in a more I won't say altruistic way, but it is kind of altruistic, more whole person, holistic way?
I think that's a hard one.
Yeah,
I
it is.
think a lot of it is like I said, just giving people the opportunity to prove themselves one way or another, just starting with that blank slate. So you might know something about somebody. When people take a job, they're always doing, G2. They're trying to figure out, hey, is the boss good? What's the culture? They're trying to network and see what they can find out. And if they talk to someone who's worked with the boss, for example, and they're like, oh, the boss is terrible, you're going to go in with that mentality. Oh, it's going to be terrible. But being able to take things with a grain of salt, step back and say, all right, I'm going to make my own assessment, not judgment. I'm going to make my own assessment.
Yes.
And I'm going to figure out the nuances of this person and then trying to work with that.
Do you generally start with trust and then is it eroded, or do you start with no trust and do you have to build it, or do you start somewhere in the middle?
Are we talking about my dating life?
It all blends together,
right?
Because as a human being, especially at your level of self-awareness and actualization, it's all one blends. So how does Shawnee roll through life?
Yeah, it's strange. I think it's kind of a hybrid of things. I generally am very trusting. So I think I automatically give people a certain level of trust, and then they can either build on it or erode it quickly. It's one way or another. But I never let anyone start with zero trust, which is a cyber term. Unless we're talking about cyber, then zero trust I agree with.
Right. I agree too.
But when we're talking person to person, I think everyone deserves a specific level of automatic. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt.
What are the first things you're seeing when you're doing an initial assessment during an interaction that's going to potentially help or hinder that initial baseline of trust you give?
One of the things is, and I'm sure many people do this, even maybe subconsciously, is how they treat other people. For example, if you're in a restaurant, I used to be a server, crappiest job ever. If they ignore the server or pretend like they're, just not a person,
Right.
that trust is gone right there.
Great
Little
tell.
things
That's
like
a great tell.
that.
Yeah. How do they view
Yeah.
others?
Yeah, because they might be meeting with me for a business reason or they want something. So I can tell how they're treating other humans. Yeah.
That's a really good one.
Also, like, how are they with pets and kids? That's
Right.
another way. Pets and kids are good judges of character.
That's a really good one. So that brings us to the insider threat. How does
Yeah.
all these skills, tools, and your ability to interact with others in this great holistic way apply to helping companies with their insider threat challenges? And what do you think the biggest challenges to the insider threat are?
I think, well, I'll answer that second part first.
Sorry, multiple questions at once.
No,
Horrible.
that's okay. I think the biggest challenge really is having leadership, company leadership, ELT level, board level, understand that insider risk, which is left of boom, it's before it's happened. Insider threat is after it's happened more, but
right.
That their insider risk and their insider threat is a human problem, like you mentioned earlier. These are humans causing problems. These are humans making bad decisions. These are humans clicking on that link because they're not thinking about the red flags in that email. It's all humans. And sometimes they leverage technical or cyber means. So there has to be cyber hygiene. There has to be things like that built in. But what I joke about is that I used to steal secrets for a living. And now I'm pretty good at protecting them because I know when I am approaching someone who has access to a secret or sensitive information I need, I understand those motivations and vulnerabilities. And that's what social engineers use. That's what criminal organizations use. That's what nation states use when they are trying to get someone to do a malicious act, or when they're trying to blackmail someone, or when they're trying to, coerce an insider to take photos of a screen or, commit fraud, things like that. So helping organizations understand that it's not just a reactive problem. It shouldn't be reactive. It should be proactive. And that you have to get all of your employees like a solid baseline and understanding how they are responsible, both from negligence or, just not knowing policy and doing workarounds, but also if they observe somebody walking down a critical pathway and their pattern of behavior has changed and there are some red flags, right, they have to say something.
Right.
And it's not ratting someone out. It's not being a narc or a tattletale. As a company, I would think everyone wants, we're a family, right? We want to take care of each other. It's not just malicious acts. It could be that person is suffering emotionally, psychologically, whatever, physically, and they might be suicidal.
A pain point has emerged.
Right. And so if companies are not well versed in how to intervene appropriately and early, you're going to have all kinds of problems. But again, it's making sure that company, from the lowest level employee to the top employee, has bought into, okay, this is one team. It's one team, one fight, right?
Right.
We have to take care of each other. We have to take care of our assets. But by taking care of our assets, we all have to do these smart steps, the cyber hygiene. If something looks wrong, reporting it, trusting your entity, trusting your management, trusting your team to do the right thing.
What aspect of human behavior do you think makes people more vulnerable to a social engineering attempt against them that is something that might be correctable, or at least something that people can address maybe right off the bat? Do you think they should target?
Trust. I think people's number one vulnerability is trust, in that people inherently are trusting. It's a natural human trait. Also, people never think it could happen to me. Companies think it could never happen to me. And so when I'm recruiting, or when I was recruiting people, those are the people I targeted. And they never suspected I was intelligence until I brought them all the way through, the recruitment cycle and recruited them. And then I dropped my cover and I said, hey, this is who I really am. Never. I mean, people, I think it's like a lot of imposter syndrome, or a lot of people don't feel special enough, or whatever you want to call it. But people don't realize that they have so many pieces to the puzzle that a bad actor would want. You know, researchers and scientists and engineers who might be working on one project, their notes from a meeting might be all somebody needs to replicate that and take it to a competitor, for example.
What are your greatest challenges you have with companies when you go in to work on the insider threat challenge with them?
That they don't want to spend the money because it's, you know, how do you prove the return on investment? I would say that, and then also that they trust their employees. I've had managers cry on my shoulder because they could not believe their employees did bad things and took it personally. They were friends. So I think the investment and understanding that sometimes, like I said earlier, I took things personally, but it's not always personal. With COVID, for example, or things that have been going on in this world, sometimes people just are trying to support their family. And when they're put at rock bottom and they feel like they don't have any other out, and a malicious actor says, I'm going to give you X amount of money to do this simple thing, a lot of people are going to do that so they can support their family.
Right. How do you help people overcome not taking it personally when people take an action that they think is in their best interest without regarding them?
If you're talking about an organization, it all boils down to culture. And I think the vast majority of organizations need to just really shift their culture. It's great to have a kumbaya culture or a very government, like the government contractors, everything need to know. Every company, every organization, every industry is very different culturally. But I think changing cultures to keep up with modern times and modern threats, which means that you have to make your employees more security aware. So if we're talking about the tech sector, not super security aware. There's no need to know. Everybody wants access to everything because they're interested. That's not okay. You know, I'm interested, but I should not be reading other people's research, for example.
Right. So what's a couple things people can start doing today to maybe start protecting themselves and protecting their organizations and protecting their brand?
Yeah, the brand's important. I think a good starting place is to do a risk assessment. You can do an insider threat vulnerability assessment. I like to call them human risk assessments, where you're reading through all your policies and procedures. You're interviewing the people that work on them in different teams, from engineering, security, to human resources, to legal, to physical security. And you're seeing that if those policies and procedures are followed, are they known about? I know companies who have data classification policies and not one employee's ever heard of it, and there's no data classification tool. So why do you have a policy if you don't make anyone do it?
Right.
After an assessment, that will give you kind of a good idea of where you fall, what you can improve on, and what you're doing well. And then second, I would say start with training and awareness. Create an awareness campaign where people are hearing insider risk or insider trust or insider threat, whatever you want to call it, and helping them understand their responsibilities, how they put the company at harm by taking shortcuts or not following policy. Policies are there for a reason, and what they can do to help the company, creating like strike teams or employee engagement teams or whatever you want to call those. I've found a lot of success in creating these teams. They've become almost like a cool kids club where we talk about, case studies, inside cases, and everybody's like, oh, that's really cool and exciting. I want to be a part of that. So it's creating that awareness, and then it's almost like creating a brand, right? For insider. Also, one of the ideas that I haven't done this yet, but for a company I was working with, it was to create a campaign saying I'm an insider, and I wanted everybody. I wanted a video, like a little commercial, or even up to the CEO, like I'm an insider. No, I'm an insider. Like we are all insiders. It's okay. We're not saying you're bad. We're all in it together.
Oh, that's really good. So Shawnee, where can people go to take it to the next level where they can bring this amazing holistic approach to the insider threat, not go on a witch hunt, and create a good, healthy corporate culture, to find out more about you and what you can do for them?
Well, I'm happy to talk to anybody. You can tell that I could talk for like 2 weeks straight about this if you'd let me. You can go to www.vaillancegroup.com. It's VAILLANCE group. You can find me on LinkedIn. And yeah, I love it. I eat, sleep, and breathe this. I'm a total nerd.
And the thing I love about it, it's not because it's the tech side of it, it's because it's the human side of it, which you were born to do this. And one of the statements I love that you made was, you love the spy. You were born to make these amazing human connections. You're doing it for a long time, and you're just applying it to this beautiful area. It's very clear you're walking your why.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like After I left the agency, this is the best way I can contribute to national security. This is the best way I can help my country, the organizations and the companies of my country and other countries protect themselves and their assets from nefarious actors that affect us all. It doesn't matter what country you're in, there's a ripple effect.
Absolutely. And what didn't I ask you that I should have asked you that you wanted to make sure you shared before we go? Anything?
Nothing I can think of.
All right. Shawnee,
No.
thank you so much for taking time out of your amazingly busy schedule and transitions in life to share these great insights with folks on how to create the culture that they need to protect themselves from any insider threat.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It was a good conversation.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Forged by Trust. If you enjoyed the show, took away a few new tools, I hope you will leave a great review of the show to show your support. If you're interested in more information about how to forge your own trust building strategies, please check me out and my website at www.peopleformula.com. I'm looking forward to sharing my next Forged by Trust episode with you next week when we chat with my very good friend and another master networker of people, Pablo Gonzalez, in the incredibly and useful episode, Forging a Network for Success.